Chris, in developing a philosophy of art, one takes a systematic approach to understand what art is. I like this kind of thinking. I've appreciated it in philosophy of science and mathematics and mind and religion and law and education. We go on. And so applying it to the arts, there are categories that are discussed, and within each category you have certain ways of trying to discern the essence of what at its root, what is it about in these different categories. So in terms of the aesthetic cognitivism program, which is maybe art seeking understanding that you're developing, what possible outcomes, if you, I don't know, we're sitting here 10 years from today, sure, what possible outcomes could we then reflect back of what you were able to learn to make progress on that could influence a philosophy of the arts?
Sure. I think that aesthetic cognitivism, or art-seeking understanding, is seeking to sort of challenge this idea that the arts are primarily having to do with beauty, right? That they are meant to be a beautiful object, and in theological terms, the conversation then tends towards approximation to objective beauty, this idea of leading Godward or something like this. And there are a number of things that could be said there, but I think that aesthetic cognitivism is seeking to shift that, to say, well, maybe that's not where we should be looking, at least primarily. Maybe we should be thinking more about understanding. I think that could have a broad range of effects, some, very particular and sort of concrete moving along, and some more sort of general societal trends. But a few that I think of, one is that people in engaging the work feel a certain expectation. And so whether it's listening to classical music or going to the gallery, I think that people stand before the painting sort of wondering what it is they're supposed to get out of this. Is it that in being in the presence of a beautiful object, they'll somehow be a more virtuous person? Or is there something they're supposed to get from it? Is there something they're supposed to understand? Well, if people entering the gallery or going to the concert hall enter it looking for an object that's beautiful, then they struggle when they see something that they can't quite add up, right? Sort of the things that artists are up to more recently don't necessarily have to do with that. But I think that if we could help people to shift to maybe the arts are doing something else primarily, it would help just average folks going to the museum or concert hall.
So if beauty has been the core traditionally of a philosophy of the arts, you're adding from the program the concept of expectations.
Sure, I suppose so. I wouldn't want people to feel like when they're going in, if they're not getting what they thought they should have gotten out of it, that it's been a worthless experience. I think that we can sort of change the experience of the work of art, not just the understanding through the work of art.
Well, expectations in general, no matter what happens, is just another way to think about the problem. And when you design a philosophy of an area, one of the objectives is to be universally exhaustive about all the things that could influence its essence. And so that's what you're trying to do. Sure. You're trying to gather as much so that nothing is left out. Then you can winnow it. It's fine. And so to add expectations as a core category, I think is very interesting. And if that gets developed, that's fine. Are there some other categories that may make sense?
I think so. I think artistic practice and production. Artists are working within schools of thought as well. And so an artist who is seeking to create a beautiful object may do so or sort of buck against that tradition of beauty. As some artists have said, it may be beautiful, but it wasn't easily won, or it's not kitschy, or it's not just pretty, it's this other thing. But I think that artists working within a tradition of the arts seeking understanding might take a very different approach. So it's not just the viewer engaging or the hearer engaging the work, but actually the artist producing the work could be freed to do something more or different or more clearly.
So when you say expectations, that to me adds another category. It doesn't necessarily, we don't have to define what it's doing, but it's a way that we can use to understand the philosophy of arts. I like to make the categories as many as possible, so we're capturing everything, and then we can group it or categorize it. But we want to make sure that we've captured everything. And so expectations is another category of way of thinking like beauty. But when we say art seeking understanding, that doesn't mean that's the only purpose of art. That's that's kind of a new way of thinking about art. So that itself becomes a way of enhancing a philosophy of art, because it uses art not as something to be understood, but as a vehicle to go the other direction. So I think that itself could be a major contribution to philosophy of art, because it takes the sort of the arrow of causation in the opposite direction.
That's interesting. I'll have to think more along those lines. I've thought primarily about the viewer before the work of art, say artists producing art, critics responding to the production of art,
Sure.
Various conditions that sort of surround the object itself that can sometimes be overly prescriptive of the sorts of art that are created,
Right.
responded to, celebrated, and so forth. But shifting the philosophy of art in the public perception and in the perception of those various stakeholders can lead to different sorts of art, different sorts of engagement with works of art, different sorts of understanding as a result of those engagements. So I think that expectation piece is an interesting piece, and I appreciate you highlighting it, but I think that there are a number of areas in which we could progress with reference to philosophy of art and with reference to particular concrete practices, objects.
And does that have an impact, for example, on how the public deals with art?
Yes, I think so. I think that then again, coming into the gallery, they maybe have a better sense of what it is they're supposed to be doing here or getting out of this, the way that it functions, and also may have more space for forms of art that they weren't quite sure what to do with previously, whether that's something like Nick Walterstorff's work songs or conceptual art, on the other hand, that is focused upon ideas.